Hey everyone, welcome to today's video. Today we're going to be talking about a hypothetical 2028 matchup between former Vice President Kamala Harris and Vice President J.D. Vance. Kamala Harris was the 2024 Democratic nominee for president after Joe Biden dropped out. Vice President Vance won the vice presidency with President Trump in November of 2024. And this matchup is just going to come along as just a hypothetical. We are nearly 4 years out from this election, but we're just going to take a look at some of the factors to take into consideration when looking at this race and how it might shape out for the two candidates. Of course, this is just my perspective of where we stand right now and how this race might look. And obviously, there is tons of time that can change this. But let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to go ahead and start by giving Kamala Harris states that are pretty well guaranteed in her column, at least I would view as guaranteed. And I'm going to take out New Jersey, even though I do think former Vice President Harris would win the state of New Jersey. I'm going to talk more about that in just a moment on the exact implications of that and how that would be affected. So now I'm just going through some of the safe Republican states, leaving out that one district in Nebraska to talk about. But of course, when we look at this map, it's awfully similar to that of 2024. And looking at that specifically, sorry, I left out Alaska and Hawaii. But we're looking at a few extra states here, at least from my perspective. Of course, we could also look at Minnesota because it was as close as Virginia. But I want to start by talking about New Jersey and Virginia, both of which I think are going to go to Kamala Harris. I don't really think that would be a debate much, depending on, of course, a few factors of how the next few years look on the midterm cycle, and then, of course, in both of their gubernatorial elections later this year. But of course, these two states are probably going to go to Vice President Harris. But the issue here is that the margins in 2024 were so close that they are required to look at. We could even be looking at Minnesota right now, even maybe New Mexico. But of course, when we're taking into consideration, we have to look at the fact that, New Jersey was won by President Biden by well over 10 percentage points in 2020. Come 2024 with Vice President Harris, she was only able to carry that state by nearly 5 percentage points. Virginia, President Biden won it by 10% in 2020, half that margin in 2024 with Vice President Harris. So those are important facts to take into consideration. But the next state I want to talk about is North Carolina. It's been one that we've talked about here recently, seems to be more of a battleground state, if you will, but the Republicans continue to win it. And I think that there's no doubt that in 2028, again, unless something significant happens in the next 3.5 years to change, Vice President Vance would probably win the state. Of course, up for debate to some extent, but it's something we have to talk about. New Hampshire is also a state I think is going to continue to be relatively close, but still pretty well guaranteed for the Democrats. It's a really tough state for Republicans to win. They almost got in 2016, but it's just not quite there yet. And with that, I want to go ahead and move over to Nebraska's 2nd district, where I think that Kamala Harris would win this district as well. She won it in 2024, so I don't really think there's much question here. It's more of a city type, a big city type of area that Kamala Harris would just perform better in and ultimately win. The next state I want to talk about, though, is moving on over to Arizona. Let's remind you that President Trump won this state by 5 percentage points in 2024. So this is an important state, but I do think that Vice President Vance has the upper hand here. Truthfully, I think that maybe to some extent, President Biden winning it in 2020 was kind of like I don't know, maybe a outlier, if you will. Of course, they do have 2 Democratic senators and a Democratic governor. We'll see how that shapes out in 2026, because Katie Hobbs definitely is not the most thought of person to be elected governor, especially in 2022. That race really came down as a shocker to many that she won that. But let's go ahead, and with that, Arizona, it being maybe a closer state, we could keep an eye on it, but I think that the Republicans probably have it pretty well in range. With that, let's move on over to Nevada, where Republicans also have started to do better in recent years. Of course, they won the gubernatorial election there in 2022. We'll see how that shapes out in 2026. But then President Trump won it for the first time. He hadn't won it in 2016. He hadn't won it in 2020, but he won it in the 2024 election. And I think Nevada is coming down to shift more Republican because of some of those diverse voters that are really benefiting the Republican Party in many ways, including in areas like Florida as well, and like Miami-Dade. Of course, that's benefiting Republicans over in Nevada as well. So with that, I think that Vice President Vance would win Nevada. And I think that puts him right now at 252 to Kamala Harris at 226. So let's go ahead and take a look at Georgia. This is a state that I truthfully think is starting to become relatively close. There's not really much doubt. I think it's honestly closer than areas like North Carolina that Democrats often point to. I think this is their new real area that they have a lot that they can do here, and I think it can really benefit them. If they run a strong candidate in 2026, they definitely have that gubernatorial election in a very close standing where they might even win it. So at that, I do still think that Vice President Vance would have the upper hand just because of the Southern vibe and a multitude of other reasons, including, pointing back again to President Trump's victory in 2024 in this state. It wasn't the biggest victory, but he was able to flip it from 2020, where he lost the state. So with that puts him just 2 electoral votes away from the presidency. Of course, all comes down to the blue wall, essentially. That was known as the blue wall until 2016. 2020 brought it back, and then 2024 dismantled it again. So we'll see what happens in 2028. But right now, I would say that Vice President Vance would probably be able to win Wisconsin. I think that he would have what it takes, and if he performs well, like I think he will in all these other states, I think he really brings that with him, brings it home with Wisconsin. But the difference here is I think that Michigan is going to go to Vice President Harris. I think that it's a state that, honestly, truthfully, many people thought that even if Kamala Harris lost in 2024, she would still win Michigan, and she didn't. So that came as a shock to some people, but I think that she would be able to win it in a matchup like this. Vice President Vance just isn't President Trump, and doesn't have that appeal that President Trump does, and it makes it harder for him to win, I would say, in certain areas. But with that, let's move on over to Pennsylvania, which is the last state to talk about. And I have to say, this is one of the toughest states to really boil it all down to. We're 3.5 years out, so all of them really are tough to say, oh, this person will for sure win, because truthfully, I don't know. I mean, Democrats could swoop the midterms and then just have an absolute enormous victory in 2028, but we'll have to see. But right now, I think with all things considered, with the map that I put together, I have to put Vice President Vance in the upper hand here. Kamala Harris wasn't able to win this in 2028. Looks like she really struggled all throughout the map, if we're being honest, in 2028. But a lot of that could be attributed to, of course, she was given a tough hand by she was given the campaign at the last minute, was required to run a really tough campaign at the last second, just 100 days left, had to vet VP candidates in just a couple weeks. Her campaign overall struggled because of a multitude of factors. Even though polling still suggested that the race was neck and neck, it ultimately ended up not being so. And if we really look at it and we talk about it specifically, in 2020, if it wasn't for COVID-19 and the COVID pandemic and President Trump's response to the pandemic before President Biden took over, truthfully, President Trump probably would have won re-election in 2020 versus 2024 because he had a pretty good overall standing with the American public, even though, of course, his approval is talked about frequently, and he frequently is not known to be a very approved of person. But if we're being honest, there's a very high likelihood that President Trump could have won in 2020 if it wasn't for his handling of the COVID-19 pandemic. So, of course, with that being said, this is the final map. Vice President Vance at 297 electoral votes and former Vice President Kamala Harris at 241 electoral votes. With this being said, I want to always emphasize that this is just a prediction. I have no clue what's going to happen. If I'm being honest, we don't even know if Kamala Harris is going to run again. There's been a lot of talk and rumors that she may be running for the gubernatorial election in California in 2026 to replace Governor Gavin Newsom. And we could even see maybe Gavin Newsom run for this race and be the Democratic nominee. Nobody knows what's going to happen. Of course, we don't even know what's going to happen with Vice President Vance. He may not be the Republican nominee. This is just an assumption and just a fun video to put together and look at what could happen leading in to 2026 and 2028. So the midterms are coming up in a year and a half. We've got Virginia and New Jersey's gubernatorial elections coming up at the end of the year. And again, like I've said throughout the video, 3.5 years away from this election in 2028. So, of course, just a prediction, just for fun. And I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Leave down in the comments what you think would happen in a hypothetical matchup. Sorry about that. Like this that I have put together. Let me know in the comments, do you agree with certain states? Do you disagree? Why or why not? I would love to hear your thoughts below. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.